Hi everyone, I'm Dale Smith, aka Journo Dale, and we're here to talk about Canadian politics.
All right, I'm here this week with Professor Nicholas Rivers from the University of Ottawa's School of Graduate and Public Affairs, I think.
Pretty close, yeah.
All right, and we are going to talk about the Environment Commissioner's report. He came out with a report last week, and one of the reports was about how the government isn't adequately tracking the efficacy of their regulatory measures on GHG reductions. And my question is, how does one really do that when you've got so many different measures in the aggregate? And so I figured I'd ask Nicholas how we go about doing this. So why don't we? Well, yeah,
Right.
no, take it away.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Happy to. So yeah, I think the commissioner's report says a few things, but I think you're right. The key message is that we don't know a lot about the regulations that are in place, and we're layering regulation upon regulation, and
And
the,
non-market, or
the
sorry, non-regulatory measures like
yeah,
carbon price
all
as
sorts of
well.
things. Yeah, subsidies. We've got this giant package that was announced last week, along with kind of stick type policies like the carbon price, along with regulatory policies. So there's really getting to be a series of overlapping policies. And this report was just about the regulatory policies and was saying we're not tracking progress on these policies all that well. Um, and I mean that's something I really agree with. I think we could do better. Having said that, it's a really difficult thing to do well. Uh, so just as you point out, we're trying to affect the overall level of greenhouse gas emissions produced from all the different kinds of activities in the Canadian economy. And we're putting on a suite of regulations. And it's really difficult for us to know how any one of those regulations is really affecting the aggregate total, or even, when we're looking at particular sectors, the total from a
Mhm.
particular sector or a particular region. So I think that the challenge is there. The challenge is big. And what do we do? What's the state of practice? Uh, I would say a couple of things. When we bring in a new regulation, so for example, we're now in the process of developing regulations for zero emission vehicles.
Right?
Um, so the department will, as this regulation and other regulations get developed, will develop a regulatory impact analysis statement, which is public, and it's an assessment of what the department thinks the new regulation will do for greenhouse gas emissions and other benefits, as well as what the cost of that new regulation will be. And typically, these are really extensively researched documents. They're available in the Canada Gazette, so they're public documents that we can all see and scrutinize. And the auditor had a couple of small comments, but I think in general, it's acknowledged that those documents are well prepared, that we have a good basis for understanding the likely effectiveness of new regulations going forward. But at that point, once the regulation is actually in place, once we just debated the regulation and tweaked it to in response to comments, and it's gone through the discussion process, we don't do a lot of kind of ex post follow on
Mm.
in evaluating the regulation. So once we've got a regulation governing the efficiency of vehicles in place, we don't really go back and look to see if it's doing what we thought it would do at the outset. Um, and I think this is what the Auditor General is really pointing out, and I think it's a valid critique.
Okay.
Um, it's not something where we're going to be able to say with 100% confidence, this outcome can be directly linked to this regulation, because there's always lots of things that affect an outcome. So thinking about greenhouse gas emissions from passenger vehicles, fuel prices matter, our social norms matter, right? If all
Yeah.
of a sudden, my neighbor buys a new Tesla, I'm like, ooh, an electric car, right? And so maybe it's not the regulation that's pushing me to buy it, it's my neighbor, or maybe it's what's happening across the border, or maybe it's new developments in technology that had nothing to do with this regulation, but makes it a lot more satisfying to buy or cheaper to buy an electric car. And so there's all kinds of things, and it's hard to parse out what's doing what, but we can still do better.
Right.
So the kind of modeling that's done to support these regulatory impact statements could be kind of applied retroactively. We could more publicly track key performance indicators, or report on more things that the data environment could always be improved. So I think there's more we could do in the ex post tracking.
For me, it seems to me one of the challenges is that the GHG inventory is always like a couple of years behind. So that would seem to me to make it more difficult to try and track things because you've always got this lag. And I'm just wondering if that's me just as an outsider or if that's if there's something to that.
I think that's a reasonable concern. That there is this roughly 18 months to 24-month lag between when an emission is emitted and when we know about it, when it's reported in the greenhouse gas inventory. So that certainly makes, tracking regulations in real time more difficult. But that's not the main problem.
Okay.
Even once the emissions have been reported, we're still not going back and looking to see, oh, did emissions fall because this regulation is actually taking an effect, or are emissions rising because this regulation isn't working as we intended it to work? We don't ask those questions typically, or at least we're not asking them and reporting them in a way that the public knows about. So okay. I think one of the things this report highlighted to me a little bit was that there is some performance tracking going on for these regulations in the department, which is not made public, or it was made public in this Auditor General report, but is not made public as a kind of normal practice. So I think that would be helpful for us to know, for Canadians to be able to say, oh, this regulation isn't achieving what we thought it would be achieving, or it is achieving what we thought it would be achieving.
Okay. I guess, is it just a matter of transparency, or are there other things that the department should be doing?
I think that's a good way to put it. I think we can improve our transparency and do more as well. So improve our transparency. I think we make available the bare minimum to the public. So again, these regulatory impact statements at the outset when we're just developing a new regulation are really thorough. And it would be nice to see more of that style of analysis that's done to support an existing regulation so that we would know whether it was achieving its outcomes and where it's not achieving its outcomes. And that would help us to support future regulatory development as well as to scrutinize our existing regulations. So I think that's, the transparency side, that's well taken. There's always better data that can be made available. And again, I think we do the minimum in the data side of things. But I also think that we could do more analytically. So we could actually go and say, despite this being a hard problem, as we pointed out at the outset, we could still do our best to solve the problem. We could still go and say, oh, we implemented these passenger vehicle regulations 10 years ago, and they were getting more stringent every year. Let's go and try to figure out if they're having the intended effect. And of course, it's not going to be something where we can say with 100% certainty, this outcome is due to this regulation alone. But I think we hide behind that uncertainty and don't do anything a lot of the time. And I think we could go further than we do. So we could do modeling type analysis, which is let's try to build a model of how we think, let's say passenger vehicle emissions would have evolved in the absence of this regulation, and then quantify how they would have evolved with this regulation. And we could keep that model up to date, to take into account of ongoing things. So if China develops a new battery, we could bring that into our model, or if fuel prices go a certain direction, we could bring that into our model, and then try to figure out how these regulations are shaping outcomes on a kind of go forward basis. We do all this at the outset of the regulation, but we don't do any kind of follow up. So I think it's possible for us to do more than we're doing. And I think, the department tends to say we can't know this, so let's not try to find anything out. And I think we could do more than that.
Okay. I guess just playing devil's advocate for a moment here, I wonder if there's also a danger of muddying the waters by having too much uncertain data out there. And I wonder if that kind of becomes counterproductive at one point.
Yeah, this is politicized. So I think we've got to be careful that the language that's used reflects or is cognizant of that politicization, and that that uncertainty could be used as a reason to undermine regulatory efforts. And I am sympathetic to that view, but I think that we're all better served by transparency in the long run. We want to know what's working and what's not working, and I think we tend in Canada, writ large, but in the environment case as well, to ask less questions and know less and develop our regulations with kind of less backward lookingness than I think we could otherwise. So I think our outcomes could be improved with better kind of follow up.
Okay, so I guess with this in mind, what would you suggest that the next steps the government should be taking would be?
Yeah, I don't think the department will do much different, and it wasn't asked to do much different. I mean, I was surprised that the recommendations in the Auditor General's report didn't push more in this regard. But so I don't think we'll see big changes. But I would, if I was pushing, if I was doing the recommendations in this report, I would have been asking for more evaluation reports on a every 2-year basis or every 5-year basis, or some sort of follow-up reports on these regulations that would require the government to track key performance indicators and to conduct ongoing modeling analysis to support the kind of previously implemented regulations. Again, we have this one-off approach to evaluation of policies where policies are analyzed with a great degree of care at their outset and then more or less forgotten about afterwards, at least in the public reporting sense.
Right.
So I think we can do better than that. That's where I would point to as a recommendation for moving forward.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Thanks, Dale, for having me on. Yeah, it was fun to talk.
All right. Dave, cheers.
Okay. See you later. Bye-bye.
And that's everything for this week. Join us again next week for some more Canadian politics. I'm Dale Smith. It's at journo_Dale on Twitter. And don't forget to like the video, share, subscribe, and support us on Patreon. Thanks, everyone.